Last time, we followed Sulla back to Italy, where he met with his newfound allies and their private armies. Today, we join him on yet another march on Rome. The consuls for the year 83, Scipio Asiaticus and Gaius Norbanus, received word of Sulla's return and moved south to defend the capital. Each consul was outfitted with an army. The details of the first encounter between Sulla and the Republican forces are somewhat difficult to reconstruct. We can surmise that Sulla did not want to appear to be the aggressor in what was shaping up to be another civil war. His plan was to retake the city of Rome and force the Senate to remove his designation as a hostis and to restore all of his property and titles. This goal would be accomplished easier if Sulla had the support, or at least the neutrality, of the cities along the Via Appia, the main road from Brundisium to Rome. To that end, he made a special effort to spread the word that he did not intend to take away citizenship rights from any of the newly enfranchised Italian allies in the south, and that his goals were both limited and reasonable. But memories of his first march on Rome were still fresh in the minds of many, and there was a general sense that what was about to occur was neither legal nor moral, and probably it should be resisted by any means necessary. Sulla's army first met Norbanus's forces outside the town of Capua. There, Sulla took the initiative and launched a surprise attack against the consul. Our sources tell us that the battle was a disaster for Norbanus. Despite his advantage in numbers, the consular force was routed. Our sources estimate a casualty figure of upwards of 7,000 men killed, with an additional 6,000 taken prisoner. The survivors of the consular army fled to the city of Capua, apparently waiting for relief from Scipio Asiaticus there. Sulla, for his part, simply ignored the town of Capua and the survivors taking refuge in the city, and continued marching on to meet Scipio's army. He sent men ahead to infiltrate Scipio's camp and sow discord among them. When his force finally reached Scipio's, the consular army was unwilling to fight. Instead, Scipio's soldiers defected en masse to Sulla, and just like that, Sulla doubled his army. As you might imagine, there were many in Scipio's army that were quite unhappy with this turn of events. Quintus Sertorius, especially, was horrified by what he interpreted as Scipio's betrayal of the Marian cause. Sertorius had once served Marius in the Cimbrian War, and again during the Social War, making him personally loyal to Marius and then later Cinna. Sulla knew all of this, and was no fan of Sertorius, blocking his attempted run for tribune back in 88. Because of this bad blood, Sertorius wanted much more aggression from Scipio. He advised him against allowing Sulla's troops to fraternize with their own, and hoped that Scipio would quickly relieve Norbanus to deliver a knockout blow to Sulla right away. However, Scipio did not share Sertorius's passionate hatred for Sulla. Rather, he found Sulla to be reasonable, and worked with him to try and avoid as much bloodshed as possible. Perhaps then, that was why Scipio dispatched Sertorius to Capua, to tell Norbanus that an armistice was going into effect, and to stay put until negotiations were underway. Sertorius reluctantly complied with these orders, but could not help but retake the town of Suessa, which had declared itself for Sulla. When news of this aggression reached Sulla, he immediately framed it as an act of bad faith on the part of Scipio. Scipio tried to save the negotiations by returning hostages to Sulla, which only inflamed Sertorius's hatred of both men. In fact, Sertorius swore eternal enmity towards Sulla, and then fled to Spain, where he would continue to fight against Sullan forces for years to come. Not only did Scipio drive Sertorius to this, but many scholars see his cooperation with Sulla as the prime reason for the defection of most of his army. Sulla, not one to waste an opportunity when he saw one, even attempted to get Scipio to join his cause. But Scipio thought it dishonorable to betray his principles and refused. In a calculated act of humility, Sulla let Scipio go, but only after forcing him to swear that he would no longer oppose him in any way. Having secured this victory, Sulla next turned his attention back to Norbanus, thinking that he might be more amenable to a negotiated peace given recent events. But Norbanus would not be persuaded. He preferred to continue the war, delaying Sulla in the south. As for Scipio, when he got back to the capital, he immediately broke his promise and partnered with Carbo to pass legislation declaring every senator marching with Sulla a hostis. The pair then held consular elections for the year 82. The winners were Carbo himself, now serving an illegal third term, and Gaius Marius the Younger. This new Gaius Marius was either the son or nephew of the more famous man who killed the Roman Republic. He was not eligible to hold the consulship since he was only 27 years old at the time of his election. If you'll remember, the minimum age required to hold the consulship was 42. But again, given the circumstances, you can't really blame either man too much for holding illegal consulships. Apparently, this is just how things work now. Marius the Younger was elected over better qualified men, like Quintus Sertorius, for example. He was to serve as a kind of mascot for the Marian-Cinnan faction. The name Marius still did have quite a bit of cachet, as if electing a relative of the original leader of the party were somehow equivalent to resurrecting the long-dead Marius himself. The strategy behind the election of Marius the Younger seems to have been to inspire Marius's old veterans to actually come out of retirement and fight for the Republican cause. And fight they did, especially the Samnites. The Samnites were an indigenous Italian ethnic group who were only recently given citizenship by the Marian faction. Sulla did not recognize their new status. The Samnites, who had recently fought against the Romans in the Social War, had been marginalized for centuries. In fact, what brought them to fight in the Social War in the first place was because their previous requests for citizenship were denied by the Senate, just like many other Italian allies. Having so recently won citizenship and property rights, they had good reason to fear disenfranchisement if Sulla and his senatorial elites were to return to power. For these reasons, the Samnites would prove invaluable allies to Marius the Younger. As soon as the spring campaign season came, Sulla found himself under attack in the south of Italy by a coalition of Samnites and the consular army of Gaius Marius. The battle did not go well for the younger Marius. Much of his force deserted to Sulla, who promptly defeated the rest of Marius's army. The survivors broke ranks and ran for the nearby town of Praeneste. The story goes that there, Marius was barely able to get himself into the city, since the gates were already closed. He only survived because his troops threw a rope down to him, which he tied around his waist. Then, they pulled him up bodily over the wall. Sulla's forces arrived soon after and besieged the city. Marius, now under siege, sent word back to the capital with instructions to purge the Senate of all suspected supporters of Sulla. While Sulla promptly murdered all the Samnite captives that he had taken in battle, and then continued on to Rome, leaving Marius trapped in Praeneste. When Sulla reached Rome, he was easily able to take the city. His first act there was to declare every pro-Marian senator a hostis, and oversee the sale of their property. He didn't linger in the capital long, though, since Carbo was still out there leading the resistance against Metellus Pius and Sulla's other officers. Included in that list are such illustrious men who killed the Roman Republic as Marcus Licinius Crassus and Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus. If you've never heard of them, don't worry, they're coming. But for now, Sulla's generals would deal a devastating blow to Carbo's forces in the north. The defeat caused the consul to flee to Africa in hopes of continuing his resistance there. With Carbo gone and Marius under siege in Praeneste, there remained only one commander in the field on the Marian side capable of resisting Sulla, a Samnite named Telesinus. Telesinus was headed south to try to relieve the siege of Praeneste, along with some of Carbo's remaining forces. But seeing the destruction of his comrades, he decided to change plans. Instead, he pointed his army towards Rome. The Samnites reached the city first and camped about a mile away from its walls. Sulla, seeing this change in direction, sent his own cavalry forces ahead to meet the Samnites outside of the city. He then force-marched his troops at double time to try and catch up, and set up a camp on the north and east side, just outside of the Colline Gate, near the Temple of Venus. The Battle of the Colline Gate would be fought sometime in the afternoon of November 1st. Its result would profoundly change the Roman Republic forever. Join me next time for the exciting conclusion of the Battle of the Colline Gate. You've been listening to The Men Who Killed the Roman Republic, Lucius Cornelius Sulla. I'm Matt Lupu. Thanks for listening.